Even as he doubles down on it, Donald Trump appears to be nervous about his controversial and extremely dangerous decision to fire the chief statistician at the Bureau of Labor Statistics simply because Trump got a jobs report that he didn't like. And there's increasing backlash among the right wing and conservatives and even some elected Republicans about this move because it imperils fiscal policy for the Federal Reserve and capital investiture from the private sector moving forward. In other words, Trump is imperiling the very economy that he's desperate to spin as being the hottest in the world. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. The reason that I say Trump is nervous is because he's made the decision, the person was fired, and yet he insists on doubling down and trying to persuade people that the jobs report was rigged. Yeah, I had no choice. I have to do it. So he said this on Truth Social this morning. Last week's jobs report was rigged, just like the numbers prior to the presidential election were rigged. That's why in both cases, there was massive record-setting revisions in favor of the radical left Democrats. Those big adjustments were made to cover up and level out the fake political numbers that were concocted in order to make a great Republican success look less stellar. I will pick an exceptional replacement. Thank you for your attention to this matter, MAGA. Now, again, that's for Donald Trump to just repeatedly double down on this. It's like he did with the Epstein thing. Like, why are you bringing this up? You made the decision. You shit-canned this person for, at best, dubious reasons, but quite frankly, authoritarian reasons. And all you're doing is picking at the scab. You are betraying your insecurity on this. You are getting backlash. And we'll take a look at some of the backlash he's getting from prominent conservative publications, people who take the economy very seriously from a right-wing lens, and whose efforts and whose work Trump reviews. We know he reviews this. So just a couple of things, though, to correct the record on this. So Donald Trump says that there were massive revisions in 2024. There were under the Biden administration. Number one, revisions are very common, particularly post-COVID, okay? Revisions happened under the first Trump administration. They happened under the Biden administration. They're happening now under the second Trump administration. Revisions have always been the case, and they are increasingly likely post-COVID because data collection is a bit more challenging, okay? And we'll get into that. Number one. Number two, he's lying about the timeline. He's either cognitively impaired or he's lying about the timeline. The revisions, which reduced the number of jobs created by President Biden over the course of like 1 year, 2024, by like 800,000 jobs, those revisions were made before the election. So to the extent that those revisions had a political impact, they made it worse for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, not better, because it said, hey, you actually created 800,000 fewer jobs than were reported. That's probably not going to be a political asset weeks before the election. Trump is saying that the revisions happened afterwards, which isn't true, but also wouldn't make much sense either, because why would those revisions occur if the point was to benefit the Democrats? Why make the revisions at all before or after the election? Just shut up about it, right? So none of it makes any sense whatsoever. There's also the fact that the same person that Trump fired was in this position all throughout this year, and Trump repeatedly bragged about jobs numbers he got in previous months. So if she was out to screw you, why wouldn't every single jobs report be atrocious? None of it makes any sense. Trump just viscerally reacted. He didn't like the data. He didn't like knowing that the labor market on his watch is weaker because of him, and so he fired the person responsible, hoping that her replacement will be somebody who will cook the books for him, okay? So none of this makes any sense. It's just Trump just panicking in public, getting nervous about the backlash that he's receiving. So let's take a look as an example of articles from the National Review and the Wall Street Journal. Trump was a religious reader of the Wall Street Journal, much like he still is an avid viewer of Fox News, even though he has beef with Fox News when they don't constantly praise him. They only praise him 99 times out of 100, and that 100th time when they don't, he flips his shit publicly, okay? So these are conservative stalwarts. These are people who are inclined to like Trump, inclined to vote for Trump, inclined to back him over the Democrat, but even they, the Wall Street Journal and the National Review, are freaking out about this decision. So they have an op-ed by the editorial board called "Trump is Shooting the Messenger." Quote, "How many people do you employ this month?" Might sound like the kind of question an employer can easily answer, but it's not. Especially for large businesses, the exact number of employees in a given month is hard to pin down. The media report layoffs and hires in round numbers, but for calculating total employment in the country, it really matters whether 500 means 478 or 523, because these discrepancies multiplied across millions of businesses make a huge difference. The Bureau of Labor Statistics sends a survey to employers each month to figure out how many people they employ as part of the jobs report. In the good old days before COVID, that survey had a response rate of about 60%. From respondents' guesses about how many people they employ, the BLS had to guess about how many people are employed in this nation of 340 million souls. That's a really hard job. The BLS employs some of the best statisticians in the world, and they happen to be pretty good at it, often getting within 0.1% of the final workforce numbers. That's how good they are. Then COVID happened, and the establishment survey response rate dropped like a rock. It hasn't recovered and currently sits at 43%. That was already hard at a 60% response rate, is now even harder. The problem of falling response rates has been well known for years, even before COVID. Quote, the quality of data from household surveys is in decline, said a paper published in the fall of the 2015 issues of the Journal of Economic Perspectives, because, quote, households have become increasingly less likely to answer surveys at all, and, quote, those who respond are less likely to answer certain questions. Within government, Trump's appointee as BLS commissioner, so Trump's own appointee, William Beach, has been a leader in calling for modernizing the surveys the statistical agencies rely on. And remember his name, because he's condemned what Trump's done with respect to firing the Biden-appointed commissioner of the BLS. As commissioner from 2019 to 2023, so again, he served 2 years under President Biden, and they didn't fire him even though he was a Trump appointee. Beach asked Congress for several $1 million in funding, peanuts in federal budget terms, to redo the survey along the lines of other countries such as the UK, which now uses an online-first methodology. It never came to be. Beach organized a letter to Congress and the executive branch signed by numerous statistical experts in February of this year outlining the long-running problems statistical agencies have been facing. Budgets have not kept up with the costs that are out of agencies' control, and staff who were doing vital work have been cut. Neither Congress nor the administration took action. Beach, a Trump appointee, has called the firing of Trump's firing of his successor, Erica McIntarfer. I butcher her name every single time. Quote, totally groundless. And he's correct. This is coming from the conservative National Review. They're even more conservative or more pro-Trump than the friggin' Wall Street Journal. And they're calling him out. The issues with jobs reporting are not about politics or her competence. In fact, they are exactly the kind of thing that an administration committed to technological modernization and government efficiency should find within its wheelhouse. And there's no reason to think this particular jobs report was any more flawed than any other. She was not standing in the way of this administration. Trump was mad about the jobs report, so he fired her. He made this abundantly clear in a Truth Social post less than an hour after the one announcing her firing, where he called the jobs numbers, quote, rigged against Republicans. So biased, apparently, that Vice President Vance was referring to them approvingly on social media mere hours beforehand. And Vance voted for this woman. Vance voted to confirm her in 2023. The vice president, Trump's vice president, voted for, because she's so credentialed and so competent. She was supported by a supermajority of Congress, of the Senate. That includes Republicans. There's no consistent partisan bias at work here, as was demonstrated last year when the same BLS that Trump said was pro-Democrat for issuing downward revisions of earlier jobs report under Biden issued the weakest jobs report of the year right before the presidential election. So again, even the National Review is calling Trump out for his butchering of the timeline. You fucked this up. If the BLS was pro-Biden, they wouldn't have issued that correction right before the presidential election, which weakened the record that Biden and Harris were working on. Now, by the way, I will point out that even with those revisions, Biden's monthly job creation rate, even if you control for COVID, all the bounce back jobs, which, by the way, I think you should count because if the shoe were on the other foot, they would count it. But I digress. Even if you don't, Joe Biden created more jobs per month on average than Donald Trump in his first term pre-COVID. Biden had a better record, even with those revisions, but it was a weaker record than what Biden was running on before. The job is hard when done well and getting harder to do well. Trump is now claiming the downward revisions of earlier jobs reports under Trump are a sign of political bias, even though that means it was initially making him look better. He says so because he wants the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, and weakening job performance makes that more likely. No one should have to take these tantrums seriously, but firing the BLS commissioner is serious. The integrity of United States statistics is important, and not just for the government, but for the private sector as well. And these reports are relied upon around the world, not just in the United States. The goal should be to get them right, not make them more favorable to the president. Trump is shooting the messenger of bad economic news, not unlike, this is so key, when China discontinues inconvenient data series that makes the Communist Party look bad. The BLS will continue to do its work, but now under a justified cloud of speculation that it's manipulating data to avoid Trump's wrath. And the economy itself is what it is, no matter how the statistics are reported. So again, the friggin' pro-Trump National Review is calling this shit out. There was another one before we get to the Wall Street Journal. We won't read the whole thing, but before the editorial board wrote this, the initial article was written by, I think, Philip Klein, a conservative, says Trump's reckless move to fire the BLS commissioner will backfire. And it goes into the details about the jobs report. Let's see. It's also hard to see how this helps Trump. If Trump installs somebody at BLS who produces great numbers, anybody who isn't already one of his supporters will dismiss them and assume that the appointee was producing the positive data to keep the boss happy. And if the numbers produced by his own appointee turn out to be bad, it will make them even more convincing. Democrats will be able to argue that Trump's handpicked commissioner released numbers showing the economy is lousy. Okay, we're not going to read the whole article, just the conclusion there where he's like, this is a stupid decision, even for selfish purposes. Then we get to the Wall Street Journal, sister publication of Fox News that Trump religiously read. He may not read it now because he's in the process of suing him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he still obsessively watches what they do. So the editorial board says the Trump economy stumbles. Okay. Friday's labor report arrived with a particular jolt with a mere 73,000 net new jobs in July. Even more bearish were the downward revisions of 258,000 jobs in May and June. Job gains over the last 3 months were barely more than 100,000. The details in the report provide little solace. The jobless rate ticked up only to 4.25% from 4.1%, but that was in part because the labor force continued to shrink. The labor participation rate fell again to 62.2% and is now down half a percentage point in a year. Employers aren't laying off workers, but they have all but stopped new hiring. Notably, most of the new jobs are in healthcare and social assistance, which rely heavily on government spending. This continues the Biden-era trend that Trumponomics was supposed to change, not so far. The much-advertised rebirth of U.S. manufacturing also hasn't arrived. The economy shed 11,000 manufacturing jobs in July, following a loss of 26,000 in May and June. And then it goes on like this, but again, we've been through it. I want to get to the conclusions about what they write about Trump firing the BLS commissioner, because it goes into tariffs and everything else. Okay. Trump seems to understand that the jobs report signals trouble because on Friday he ordered the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He claims the numbers are being politically manipulated, but he offered no proof. BLS has its problems, but the timing suggests he's shooting the messenger. There are bound to be monthly revisions when tariff and deportation policies are so volatile. Trump's other scapegoat is the Federal Reserve, which he says has been too late to cut interest rates. Maybe that will prove to be true, but the Fed now has to navigate Trump's tariff uncertainty and the large fact that inflation is still above its 2% target. Every public opinion poll say voters remain unhappy about the price increases they're paying. A saving grace, we hope, is that a new tax law and deregulation will reduce business costs and lift investment, but Trump can help by stopping his trade war. If he won't roll back on his tariffs, he can at least declare he's content with where they are and has no plans for more. So again, they're conservatives. They want deregulation and tax breaks and yada yada, but they're freaking out about this. They also wrote an op-ed called The Bureau of Labor Denial about Lori Chavez DeRemer, who is, when she was in Congress, she was a relatively pro-labor Republican. She supported the PRO Act. And Ana Kasparian and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, nominal progressives, celebrated the fact that she was nominated. Oh my God, she's amazing. Of course, in order to get confirmed by the Republican majority, she effectively had to shed her pro-labor bona fides in front of the Senate. Like, oh, I don't support the PRO Act anymore or anything else. So she's virtually no different from any other Republican and objectively worse on labor, objectively, than any Democrat. Literally any Democratic labor secretary would be better and more pro-labor than this lady, okay? But she finds herself in an awkward position because those jobs reports were disastrous, period. Trump made this stupid decision, the authoritarian decision to shit-can the BLS commissioner. And with respect to manufacturing sector, which is really like something that she's been focusing on, oh, we're going to have a manufacturing boom. Well, we didn't under Trump. We actually shed manufacturing jobs. There was a manufacturing boom under Biden. He was objectively better. And under Trump, it's once again in decline. We're shedding manufacturing jobs, which, by the way, we were told that the tariffs, those were going to bring back manufacturing jobs. So the whole thing is a shit show. And she's put in an awkward position of trying to spin it, which you can, okay? So this is a Wall Street Journal editorial board about her. We had our say Saturday about Trump's dubious decision to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after a July jobs report, and the world has piled on. It's worth noting the burden of the advisors who have to support Trump's claim that the data were rigged. Start with Labor Secretary Lori Chavez DeRemer, who told Bloomberg TV early Friday that even though the jobs data was revised downward for May and June, quote, we've seen positive job growth. Okay, sometimes in politics you have to look at a rotten apple and call it merely overripe. But then Trump fired the BLS director, who reports to Chavez DeRemer. She snapped to attention. I agree wholeheartedly with that POTUS that our jobs numbers must be fair, accurate, and never manipulated for political purposes, she tweeted. So were the jobs data that were positive in the morning rigged by the afternoon? We realize the troops have to support the commander, but Ms. Chavez DeRemer isn't making a name for herself as a credible spokesperson for labor policy or data. Or consider Jamison Greer, the U.S. trade rep who was asked on CBS's Face the Nation Sunday about the decline in manufacturing jobs. Greer responded, quote, yeah, I saw that in my own view, as I think a lot of companies were waiting to see if the tax bill was going to come through with the expensing for capital goods and things like that. That's plausible, but then host Margaret Brennan pointed out that Trump had said the jobs data was fake. Greer had to scramble to echo the boss. Quote, well, I think, what I saw the president did, he also talked about just the record from BLS, last year. As Alicia Finley writes nearby, we'll take a look at that very briefly, the BLS job revisions are best explained by a decline in business response rates, not political bias. The reality of slowing job growth is clear to anyone paying attention, no matter the official statistics. Trump data denial is one more reason fewer Americans will trust the government, specifically his government. And then this is the article by Alicia Finley. Trump claims the jobs report was rigged. Was it? He does himself and his party no favors by waving away economic reality, as Biden did with inflation. So again, we're not going to go through the whole thing, but she makes the case exactly what the Wall Street Journal editorial board says at the bottom. So we're just going to focus on the final three paragraphs. Trump tacitly conceded that the economy is losing steam by lashing out Friday at Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for being too late to cut interest rates. While Trump has resisted his itch to fire Powell, firing again, I'm going to butcher her name, but let's just say the BLS commissioner, is sure to undermine public and investor confidence in government data just the same. What does Trump plan to do if next month's jobs numbers are meh or worse? Order the BLS to change them? Democrats are sure to accuse his administration of suppressing unfavorable economic data in any case. After her defenestration, Trump's advisors may be even more reluctant to bear bad economic news, lest he say off with their heads too. Trump does himself and his party no favors by waving away economic reality. Democrats spent the Biden presidency playing down inflation, and look where that got them. So there you have it, folks. Trump is receiving massive backlash from pro-business, pro-Republican, pro-deregulation, pro-Trump, in a lot of cases, conservatives who are simply smarter and more honest, to the extent that that's possible, than Trump, right? And they're saying this is a disaster. And that is why, going all the way back, Trump is not only doubling down on his decision, but he's by spamming this shit out and talking about it nonstop, he's probably trying to do two things. Number one, distract from the Epstein files. But we've not forgotten, Donald. As soon as there's more to talk about, we're definitely going to be on it. And number two, trying to persuade people who are now panicking about this, both in the private sector and in conservative politics. We even had Senator Loomis, I think, from Wyoming, if I'm remembering the state. She's calling this out. People are just panicking about this. And Trump is panicking too. He's nervous that this isn't being embraced enthusiastically by all comers. And he's trying to assure the right wing in this country that what he's doing is a smart decision. It is not, and Democrats must work aggressively to make sure that he and the Republican Party are politically punished for it in the November midterms. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.